The heat pressed down on Peleliu like a living thing. September 15, 1944, lay heavy across the Pacific island. In the darkness before dawn, a young Japanese officer crouched inside his fortified position on what would become known as Bloody Nose Ridge. Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamamoto felt confident. His men had spent 3 long months turning these coral caves into death traps. Every angle calculated, every field of fire measured. 800 yards of clear sight lines stretched across the invasion beaches below. The defensive positions were masterpieces of military engineering. Concrete reinforced the natural coral. Overlapping machine gun nests covered every approach. They had studied American tactics from previous battles across the Pacific. Tarawa, Saipan, Guam. They knew what was coming. Rifle fire, mortars, naval bombardment. They had prepared for everything they could imagine. But imagination has limits. At 06:02 hours, the first American heavy machine gun opened fire from an unexpected angle. Yamamoto watched his carefully planned defense disintegrate in less than 4 minutes. The sound was unlike anything they had trained against. Japanese machine guns fired in short, controlled bursts. This weapon roared, a continuous thunder that seemed to tear the air itself apart. It didn't just suppress his soldiers, it cut through coral rock like butter. Shredded, reinforced positions, turned his men into memories before they could identify the source of fire. By nightfall, Yamamoto would write in his combat journal a phrase that would appear in dozens of captured Japanese documents: Akuma no Buki, the devil's weapon. He didn't know he had encountered the M2 Browning 50 caliber heavy machine gun, a weapon that would fundamentally transform Pacific combat. A weapon that would shatter every defensive calculation the Japanese Imperial Army had made. This weapon would make Japanese soldiers abandon prepared positions at the mere sound of its distinctive roar. 450 rounds per minute of .50 caliber ammunition were about to rewrite the rules of jungle warfare forever. The psychological impact would prove as devastating as the physical destruction. What followed was industrial firepower meeting human courage. The mathematics were brutal and absolute. Imperial General Headquarters had distributed comprehensive defensive modifications after the devastating losses at Tarawa. 4,690 Japanese defenders killed in just 76 hours. The Tactical Research Section had analyzed every American amphibious assault from Guadalcanal forward. Colonel Kunio Nakagawa commanded Peleliu's defense. His tactical manuals contained detailed specifications of every weapon system the Americans had deployed. The M1 Garand rifle with its 500-yard effective range. The Bayar automatic rifle capable of 550 rounds per minute. The M19 30 caliber machine gun firing 400 to 500 rounds per minute. Nakagawa's 10,500 men had constructed 500 reinforced positions across Peleliu's 6 square miles. Captain Hideaki Suzuki's construction battalion had calculated precise specifications. Coral limestone and concrete walls ranging from 2 to 5 feet thick, sufficient to withstand direct hits from 75mm artillery. Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns, firing 7.7mm rounds, were emplaced to create interlocking fields of fire. 450 rounds per minute, with effective range of 800 meters. The manual specified engagement ranges precisely. American infantry could be engaged at 600 yards, suppressed at 400 yards, eliminated at 200 yards using coordinated machine gun fire. But the Japanese calculations contained a fatal flaw. Their entire defensive doctrine assumed American machine gun capabilities roughly equivalent to their own weapons. firing rifle-caliber ammunition at ranges under 1,000 yards, with limited ability to penetrate fortified positions. The Imperial Army had extensive experience with machine gun warfare. Their Type 92 had served since 1932 in China, Manchuria, and throughout the Pacific. Japanese infantry training emphasized machine gun tactics. Dedicated machine gun companies in every battalion. Their defensive manual dedicated 47 pages to countering enemy automatic weapons fire. What this manual couldn't include was any reference to a weapon firing 50 caliber ammunition, capable of penetrating 75 inches of steel armor at 500 yards, destroying light vehicles at 1,500 yards, maintaining lethal effectiveness against personnel at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. The Japanese had no equivalent weapon system in their infantry arsenal. Their heaviest infantry portable machine gun fired 7.7 millimeter rounds, roughly 303 caliber. They had literally never encountered anything like the M2 Browning. The Americans were about to introduce them to industrial-scale firepower. 3 months of defensive preparation would become functionally obsolete in the first hour of combat. The weapon that would terrorize Japanese defenders had been born from World War I necessity. John Moses Browning designed the weapon in 1918 as an anti-aircraft gun. Its true potential wouldn't be realized until adapted for ground combat in the late 1930s. Army Ordnance Department records revealed a weapon unlike anything in the infantry arsenal. The M2 fired 50 BMG cartridges, Browning machine gun rounds measuring 5.45 inches long, bullets weighing 661 grains, more than 4 times heavier than standard rifle ammunition. Muzzle velocity reached 2,910 feet per second, generating 13,350 foot-pounds of kinetic energy per round. Most critically for Pacific combat, the M2's rate of fire ranged from 450 to 550 rounds per minute. Later modifications achieved 600 rounds per minute. Unlike lighter machine guns that fired controlled bursts to prevent barrel overheating, the M2's heavy barrel allowed sustained fire. 200-round belts without significant accuracy degradation. The ammunition represented a leap in destructive capability. Ordnance Department testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground documented the 50 caliber round's penetration characteristics. It could pierce 75 inches of face-hardened armor plate at 500 yards, penetrate half an inch at 1,000 yards, maintain lethal effectiveness against personnel targets beyond 2,000 yards. Field modifications in the Pacific included armor-piercing incendiary rounds. These could penetrate even heavier materials. What made the M2 revolutionary for Pacific Island combat was its mounting versatility. The weapon weighed 84 pounds without its tripod, heavy but portable by a 3-man crew. The M3 tripod added another 44 pounds, but provided stability for accurate long-range fire. The M2 could be mounted on virtually any vehicle: jeeps, half-tracks, tanks, creating mobile fire platforms that could reposition rapidly across the battlefield. Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Puller commanded the 1st Battalion 7th Marines. He had specifically requested additional M2 machine guns for his unit's assault on Peleliu. His after-action report from Cape Gloucester documented the weapon's effectiveness against Japanese bunkers. .50 caliber fire could penetrate coral rock and coconut log fortifications that stopped 30 caliber rounds cold. By September 1944, the 1st Marine Division landing on Peleliu carried 48 M2 heavy machine guns, distributed across infantry battalions, weapons companies, and vehicle mounts, nearly double the standard division allocation. This concentration represented 21,600 rounds per minute of destructive capability. Japanese defenders had no framework to comprehend this level of firepower. Lake City Army Ammunition Plant in Missouri was producing 50 caliber ammunition at a rate exceeding 500 million rounds annually by mid-1944. Each Marine division received priority allocation of armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer variants. The entire supply chain from American factories to Pacific beachheads demonstrated logistical superiority. Japanese forces couldn't match. The weapon was ready. The ammunition was abundant. Japanese defenders were about to learn why American Marines called it the 50, with reverence approaching religious devotion. White Beach 1, Peleliu, September 15, 1944, at 0612 hours. Sergeant Raymond Fitzgerald commanded the lead M2 position with Company K, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. His three-man crew had landed in the third wave, manhandling their 128-pound weapon system through chest-deep water. Japanese mortar fire turned the beach around them into chaos. Fitzgerald had been carrying 50 caliber ammunition since Guadalcanal. He knew the weapon's capabilities intimately. Every technical specification, every peculiar characteristic of its cycling mechanism. What happened at 0612 hours would exceed even his experienced expectations. The Japanese had allowed the first two waves to land. Following Colonel Nakagawa's defensive doctrine, they waited until Marines were concentrated on the narrow beach, then opened fire from prepared positions 400 yards inland. Type 92 machine guns from 3 different bunkers opened simultaneously. Their 7.7 millimeter rounds cut through Marines who were still organizing for the advance inland. Fitzgerald's crew had just locked their tripod into the coral sand when Japanese fire began. Through his field glasses, he spotted muzzle flashes from a reinforced bunker on the ridge line, approximately 650 yards distant, well within his weapon's effective range, beyond what Japanese doctrine considered dangerous for their fortified positions. "Load armor piercing," Fitzgerald ordered. His assistant gunner, Corporal Daniel Hayes, fed the first belt of linked 50 caliber rounds into the receiver. The distinctive metallic click-clack of the charging handle being pulled twice echoed even over the battle noise. At 0614 hours, Fitzgerald squeezed the trigger. The M2 roared to life with a sound unlike any other weapon on the battlefield. A deep, hammering thunder that seemed to compress the air itself. The weapon bucked against its tripod with each shot, but remained stable enough for Fitzgerald to walk his fire directly toward the Japanese bunker. What happened next was documented in multiple after-action reports. It would be repeated across Peleliu hundreds of times over the next 2 months. The 50 caliber rounds didn't just impact the coral-reinforced bunker. They began systematically destroying it. Coral chunks exploded outward. The carefully constructed firing aperture widened with each burst. Within 15 seconds of sustained fire, approximately 120 rounds, the bunker's structural integrity was compromised. Fitzgerald could see, and Japanese defenders inside certainly felt, the devastating effect of rounds that carried 4 times the kinetic energy of rifle bullets. The coral that had been calculated to stop 30 caliber fire shattered like pottery under the 50 caliber onslaught. Concrete reinforced sections that should have been impervious to anything short of artillery cracked and spalled. Deadly fragments ricocheted through the interior. At 0616 hours, Japanese return fire from that position ceased. Fitzgerald shifted his aim to the second bunker, 700 yards to the left. His barrel was already heating, but well within operational parameters. He had 800 more rounds of linked ammunition ready. The morning had only just begun. Behind him, 2 more M2 positions were setting up. The symphony of 50 caliber fire was about to become a chorus. Japanese defensive calculations were about to collapse, with the certainty of mathematical proof meeting reality. September 16, 1944. D+1. Japanese defensive communications intercepted by Marine intelligence revealed something unprecedented in Pacific War operations. Radio operator Private First Class Thomas Brennan was assigned to the 1st Marine Division Intelligence Unit. He had been monitoring Japanese frequencies since the landing. What he heard on the morning of September 16th would be documented in classified intelligence summaries. At 0730 hours, a Japanese transmission from Bloody Nose Ridge to Colonel Nakagawa's command post used a phrase that appeared in the intercept log: Jigoku no Kikai, Hell's Machine. The transmission requested immediate tactical guidance for countering American heavy machine guns. 3 fortified positions had been destroyed in the previous afternoon, despite being constructed to withstand artillery. By 0900 hours, additional intercepts revealed growing panic in Japanese defensive communications. One transmission, translated by Navy language officers attached to Marine intelligence, stated enemy automatic weapons penetrating prepared positions. Coral fortifications inadequate. Request permission to relocate to secondary positions. This represented a fundamental break from Japanese defensive doctrine, which emphasized holding positions to the death. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Deacon commanded 2nd Battalion 1st Marines. He documented in his after-action report an incident that occurred at 11:45 hours on September 16th. His unit was advancing toward a ridgeline position that aerial reconnaissance had identified as heavily fortified. 3 M2 machine guns from his weapons company established positions at approximately 800 yards. They began systematic fire on the Japanese bunkers. After 20 minutes of sustained 50 caliber fire, something extraordinary happened. Japanese soldiers began evacuating the position, not in organized withdrawal, but in panicked flight. Marine observers counted 17 enemy soldiers abandoning what appeared to be intact fortifications, running toward secondary positions deeper in the ridgeline complex. This behavior contradicted everything Marines had experienced in previous Pacific battles. Japanese forces invariably fought to the death from prepared positions. Deacon's report noted enemy abandonment of fortified positions under heavy machine gun fire represents significant change in defensive behavior. Positions were not destroyed, but rendered untenable by sustained 50 caliber fire. Psychological effect appears equal to physical destruction. By September 18th, Marine intelligence had compiled reports from across the division's front. Japanese forces were consistently abandoning positions when M2 fire was directed at them, even when the fortifications remained structurally intact. The pattern was consistent enough that tactical doctrine began evolving in real time. Company commanders started requesting M2 fire to prep positions before infantry assault, not necessarily to destroy them, but to induce evacuation. Captain Vincent Russo commanded Company 1, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. He described the new tactics in his combat journal. We've learned to recognize the sound of success. When the 50s open up, we listen for secondary explosions or watch for enemy evacuation. Either way, the position becomes ours. The psychological impact of these weapons exceeds their physical destruction, as formidable as that is. The Japanese had encountered a weapon that didn't just threaten death. It promised a specific form of death that undermined their defensive calculations. Coral dust from disintegrating fortifications filled bunkers. The distinctive thunder of 50 caliber fire could be heard across the entire battlefield. Japanese soldiers, for the first time in the Pacific War, were choosing survival over position defense. Colonel Nakagawa's defensive strategy was collapsing, not because his positions were being destroyed, but because his soldiers had discovered that American industrial firepower had made those positions into death traps rather than protective fortifications. The tactical evolution of M2 employment had accelerated beyond anything Marine planners had anticipated. What began as conventional machine gun support had transformed into a comprehensive system for breaking Japanese defensive psychology. Before infantry ever closed with enemy positions, Marine weapons companies across Peleliu had developed standardized procedures. The technique, which Marines termed steel rain, began with reconnaissance identifying Japanese fortified positions. Rather than immediate assault, M2 crews established positions at ranges between 600 and 1,200 yards. Distances where Japanese return fire was largely ineffective, but American .50 caliber rounds remained devastatingly accurate. The firing pattern followed a calculated sequence. Initial bursts of 20 to 30 rounds would target the primary firing aperture of Japanese bunkers. The coral and concrete systematically chipped away with each impact. Gunners would then shift fire to adjacent areas, methodically working across the entire fortification face. The psychological impact was calculated. Defenders could hear and feel their protective walls disintegrating, knowing that structural collapse or penetration was inevitable. Staff Sergeant Walter Kowalski commanded an M2 section with Weapons Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. He had refined the technique to devastating effectiveness. His September 25th combat report described the systematic reduction of a Japanese strongpoint. Intelligence estimated it held 40 to 50 defenders. Kowalski's two M2 positions established at 750 yards and began coordinated fire at SOC 6:20 hours. We fired in alternating pattern, Kowalski's report stated. First gun would fire 50-round bursts on the primary aperture, while second gun targeted the ventilation shaft. We'd switch targets every 3 minutes. Could see coral dust and fragments ejecting from both openings. After 18 minutes, approximately 900 rounds total expenditure, observed enemy evacuation from rear exit we'd previously identified through aerial photos. The mathematics of terror had become quantifiable. Marine intelligence officers began calculating suppression time, the average duration of M2 fire required to induce Japanese evacuation of fortified positions. By late September, the average had dropped to 15 minutes of sustained fire. Japanese defenders were abandoning positions not because they were destroyed, but because the relentless hammering of .50 caliber impacts made remaining psychologically impossible. Japanese combat diaries recovered after the battle provided the defenders' perspective. Lieutenant Takashi Hayashi commanded a reinforced infantry platoon on Hill 100. He wrote on September 24th, "American devil weapons fire without ceasing. The sound alone destroys men's courage. Our walls crack and crumble. Dust fills every space. We cannot breathe, cannot see, cannot return effective fire. Men are begging to withdraw to secondary positions. I have refused 3 times. How long can discipline hold against such weapons?" Hayashi's position was overrun on September 26th. His diary, found beside his body, ended with an entry dated September 25th. "The devil weapons have won. Discipline has collapsed. Half my men fled during the night. I cannot blame them. This is not combat. This is industrial extermination." The logistics of sustained .50 caliber fire operations on Peleliu revealed the full scope of American industrial superiority. Marine supply officers had initially calculated ammunition requirements based on conventional machine gun employment. Approximately 200 rounds per weapon per day for sustained operations. Reality exceeded projections by a factor of 10. Major Gerald Thompson served as Division Ordnance Officer for the 1st Marine Division. He documented in his logistics report that M2 machine guns were firing an average of 2,000 rounds per weapon per day during intense combat periods. The 48 M2s deployed across the division were consuming 96,000 rounds daily, nearly 1.5 million rounds per week. This exceeded the entire division's rifle ammunition expenditure. The supply chain supporting this firepower demonstrated capabilities Japanese forces couldn't comprehend. Liberty ships arriving at Peleliu's Purple Beach carried dedicated loads of 50 caliber ammunition. Navy construction battalions had established ammunition dumps within 400 yards of the front lines. Dedicated supply routes were marked by engineer tape. Ammunition parties made continuous runs from dumps to gun positions, often under Japanese fire, ensuring M2 crews never lacked for rounds. Each 50 caliber round represented a complex industrial product. The cartridge brass came from copper mines in Montana and Arizona. The smokeless powder was manufactured at munitions plants in Tennessee and Illinois. The projectiles were machined in factories across the Midwest. The complete rounds were assembled at Lake City Army Ammunition Plant, loaded onto trains, transported to West Coast ports, shipped 5,000 miles across the Pacific, delivered to Marine gunners who would fire them at Japanese positions, all within weeks of manufacture. Japanese forces had no equivalent supply system. Their Type 92 machine guns were firing ammunition manufactured in arsenals in Japan or Manchuria, transported by ships that increasingly fell victim to American submarines. Ammunition shortages had become critical by October. Intercepted Japanese communications ordered strict fire discipline, 10-round bursts maximum. Fire only at confirmed targets within 300 meters. American M2 gunners faced no such restrictions. Staff Sergeant Robert Patterson served as Weapons Platoon Sergeant with Company L, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. He described the difference in his combat journal. "We fire the 50s like we own the world supply of ammunition because we do. Yesterday, my section fired 3,400 rounds, destroying enemy positions we couldn't even see clearly. Japanese return fire was sporadic, maybe 200 rounds total. They're running out of everything. We're running out of nothing." The industrial arithmetic was devastating. American factories produced more 50 caliber ammunition in a single day than Japanese arsenals manufactured in a week. American supply ships delivered ordnance to Peleliu in a single voyage than Japanese ships could transport to the island in a month. And Japanese ships had to run a submarine gauntlet that American vessels faced only from limited air attacks. By early October, Japanese positions were being suppressed by weapons firing unlimited ammunition, while Japanese defenders rationed every round. The mathematical conclusion was inevitable. American industrial capacity translated directly into tactical superiority that Japanese courage and preparation could not overcome. The Devil weapons were fed by an industrial system that Japanese forces had no framework to counter. Every 50 caliber round fired represented not just destructive power, but proof of industrial dominance that rendered resistance increasingly futile. November 27, 1944. Peleliu had been officially secured for 3 weeks. Isolated Japanese holdouts continued resistance from the deepest cave systems. Marine Intelligence Section had begun systematic interrogation of the 302 Japanese prisoners taken during the campaign, an unprecedented number that exceeded all previous Pacific Island battles combined. The interrogation facility was established in a captured Japanese headquarters near the airfield, staffed by Nisei linguists from the Military Intelligence Service. Technical Sergeant Kenneth Watanabe was a second-generation Japanese-American from California. He conducted interviews that would provide the most detailed assessment of Japanese perspectives on American heavy machine gun operations. Private First Class Koji Tanaka was captured on October 15th after his position was isolated. He provided testimony documented in Classified Intelligence Report S-347B. Tanaka had served with the 2nd Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment. He had experienced 6 weeks of combat before his capture. His account, translated by Watanabe, revealed the psychological devastation of facing continuous 50 caliber fire. The sound arrives before death, Tanaka stated in his interrogation transcript. We called it Akuma no Unari, the devil's roar. You could hear it across the entire battlefield. When it began, everyone knew someone was dying. The weapon fired without stopping. Our walls would shake, crack, and finally break. Coral dust filled everything. We could not see, could not breathe properly. The sound was inside our heads, destroying our ability to think clearly. Watanabe's report noted that Tanaka began trembling visibly when describing the M2's distinctive sound, suggesting acute psychological trauma. This reaction was consistent across multiple prisoner interrogations. The weapon had created what military psychologists would later term acoustic trauma, the sound itself becoming a weapon independent of the round's physical effects. Corporal Hideaki Yoshida was captured November 3rd from positions on the Northern Ridge Line. He provided even more detailed tactical analysis. Yoshida had been a machine gun instructor before deployment to Peleliu. He understood weapon systems comprehensively. His testimony revealed how quickly Japanese tactical assumptions had collapsed. Our training taught us that machine guns fire in short bursts to preserve ammunition and prevent barrel overheating. American Devil weapons violated everything we knew. They fired continuously for minutes, without pause. We calculated this was impossible. The barrels should fail. The ammunition should be exhausted. But the fire never stopped. We realized the Americans possessed industrial capacity beyond our understanding. Yoshida's interrogation included technical observations that impressed his interrogators. He accurately estimated the M2's rate of fire, correctly identified that different ammunition types were being employed based on tracer patterns, understood that the weapons were being fired from ranges exceeding 800 meters, distances his training had assured him were safe from machine gun fire. Our strongest positions became traps. The walls we built for protection became prisons. When Devil weapons targeted our positions, we had two choices: remain and die when walls collapsed, or evacuate and die from rifle fire. Many men chose evacuation because death from rifles seemed more honorable than being buried alive in collapsing fortifications. Lieutenant Masao Fujimoto was the highest-ranking officer to survive the battle. He was captured November 19th in deteriorated physical and mental condition. His interrogation, conducted over 3 days due to his weakened state, provided command-level perspective on the defensive collapse. Fujimoto had commanded Company K, 3rd Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, with responsibility for defending a critical ridge-line sector. Colonel Nakagawa's strategy was perfect for conventional combat. Every calculation was correct, except one. We had no data on American heavy machine guns. When those weapons were employed against us, our entire defensive plan became obsolete within days. I submitted 3 requests for tactical guidance. No guidance existed. The weapons were simply beyond our capacity to counter with available resources. Fujimoto's testimony included a devastating admission. By the 3rd week, my men were abandoning positions not because of cowardice, but because remaining was certain death, with no tactical purpose. When you cannot fight effectively, continuing to die serves no military objective. This realization spread throughout the garrison. The devil weapons had defeated our spirit before they killed our bodies. The interrogation transcripts documented a complete psychological victory that preceded tactical victory. The M2 hadn't just destroyed Japanese positions, it had destroyed Japanese confidence in their defensive doctrine. The lessons learned from Peleliu's M2 employment spread rapidly through Marine Corps operations in the Pacific. After action reports, tactical bulletins, and direct communications between division commanders ensured that the devastating effectiveness of concentrated heavy machine gun fire became standard doctrine for subsequent operations. Major General Roy Geiger commanded 3rd Amphibious Corps. He issued Tactical Directive 1844 on December 12, 1944, based entirely on Peleliu observations. The directive mandated increased M2 allocation to all divisions preparing for future operations. It specified minimum ratios of 1 M2 per rifle company, with additional weapons concentrated in battalion weapons companies. Most significantly, it authorized unrestricted ammunition expenditure for 50 caliber weapons during active operations. The impact was immediate and measurable. The 4th Marine Division, preparing for Iwo Jima operations, received its M2 allocation increased from 48 to 72 weapons. The 1st Marine Division, reorganizing for Okinawa, was allocated 84 M2 machine guns, nearly double its Peleliu strength. Across the Pacific, Marine divisions were being transformed into heavy firepower formations centered on the devastating capability of the 50 caliber Browning. Training programs evolved to match tactical requirements. Camp Pendleton, California, established a dedicated M2 gunnery school in January 1945. The curriculum, developed by veterans rotated from Peleliu, emphasized sustained fire techniques, long-range engagement, and the psychological employment of the weapon. Instructors taught students not just how to fire the M2, but how to use its distinctive sound and visible destructive effects to induce enemy evacuation of fortified positions. Gunnery Sergeant Edward Harrison had commanded an M2 section through Peleliu's entire campaign. He became a primary instructor. His training manual, Employment of Cal .50 machine guns against fortified positions, became required reading for all weapons company personnel. The manual's introduction stated bluntly, "The M2 Browning is not simply a larger machine gun. It is a psychological weapon that destroys enemy will as effectively as it destroys enemy positions. Proper employment can reduce casualties and shorten battles." 5 months after Peleliu's official securing, the final strategic assessment of M2 employment was completed by the Marine Corps Equipment Board. The comprehensive report, spanning 247 pages with appendices, provided quantitative analysis of what frontline Marines had experienced firsthand. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun had fundamentally transformed infantry combat in the Pacific War. The statistical analysis was overwhelming. Across Peleliu's 73-day campaign, the 48 M2 machine guns deployed had fired approximately 1.8 million rounds, an average of 37,500 rounds per weapon. They had been directly credited with neutralizing 387 fortified positions, supporting advances that reduced American casualties by an estimated 40% compared to pre-Peleliu projection models. The weapon's effectiveness ratio, enemy positions neutralized per American casualties sustained while employing the weapon, exceeded every other infantry weapon system by significant margins. But numbers alone couldn't capture the weapon's true impact. Captain James Hartley had commanded a rifle company through the entire Peleliu campaign. He provided testimony that was included in the Equipment Board report. The 50 changed how we fought. Before Peleliu, assaulting fortified positions meant accepting heavy casualties. Marines would advance against bunkers, knowing some wouldn't survive. The M2 changed that calculation. We could reduce positions from safe distances. We could break enemy will before risking our men. It saved lives. Our lives in ways that statistics can't fully express. The psychological dimension received particular emphasis in psychiatric evaluations conducted by Navy medical officers. Commander Robert Aldridge served as division psychiatrist for the 1st Marine Division. He documented that combat fatigue rates among infantry units supported by M2 fire were 30% lower than units without such support. The presence of the weapon provided psychological security that reduced stress casualties as effectively as it reduced battle casualties. Japanese perspectives gathered through prisoner interrogations and captured documents confirmed American assessments from the opposing viewpoint. Post-war interrogations conducted by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey included extensive questioning about weapon systems. When asked to identify the most feared American weapon, 73% of Japanese infantry veterans mentioned heavy machine guns specifically, a higher percentage than named artillery, tanks, or aircraft. Colonel Tadashi Nakano was a staff officer who had served at Imperial General Headquarters during the war's final year. He provided testimony in 1946 that was remarkably candid. American heavy machine guns represented everything we could not match: industrial capacity, unlimited ammunition, sustained fire capability, destructive power against fortifications. Our soldiers called them devil weapons, not because they were particularly cruel, but because they seemed supernatural. How could weapons fire continuously for minutes? How could ammunition supplies never be exhausted? How could positions we calculated as impregnable be destroyed in less than an hour? These weapons demonstrated American material superiority more clearly than any other system. The legacy of Peleliu's M2 employment extended far beyond the Pacific War. The weapon remained in American military service through Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Afghanistan, and Iraq, the longest-serving machine gun in military history. Modern soldiers operating M2 Brownings in 21st-century conflicts are using weapons whose fundamental design remains unchanged from those that terrorized Japanese defenders on Peleliu in 1944. The caves on Peleliu, now part of Peleliu State in the Republic of Palau, remain as they were in 1944. Many still show impact marks from .50 caliber fire, pockmarked coral, spalled concrete, collapsed apertures. Japanese and American veterans have returned together in annual reunions since 1985. Walking battlefields where the devil weapons once roared. At the 2024 Eurotown Thor reunion, one of the last surviving Japanese defenders, 98-year-old former Private Yuki Nakamura, stood beside 99-year-old former Marine Sergeant William Davis at a preserved M2 position, overlooking what had been Japanese defensive lines. Through a translator, Nakamura said simply, "This weapon changed war. We had courage. You had this." Courage was not enough. Davis nodded slowly, his hand resting on the M2's receiver, and replied, "We called it the .50. You called it the devil weapon. We were both right." The streams of .50 caliber fire that had reached up to 2,000 yards under optimal conditions hadn't just cleared fortifications. They had demonstrated a fundamental truth of modern industrial warfare. Superior technology, backed by unlimited industrial production, creates battlefield advantages that tactical skill and personal courage cannot overcome. The Japanese soldiers who fled their carefully prepared positions when the devil weapons opened fire weren't cowards. They were realists, confronting mathematical certainty. The battle for Peleliu ended on November 27, 1944, after 73 days of combat. Of approximately 10,500 Japanese defenders, Roughly 10,000 died. Only 302 surrendered. Unprecedented in Pacific operations and directly attributed to the psychological breaking power of weapons like the M2. American forces suffered 1,794 killed and 8,010 wounded, according to official casualty figures. Without the M2's devastating effectiveness, Marine planners estimated casualties would have exceeded 15,000. The transformation was complete from confidence in fortified positions to recognition that American industrial firepower could negate any defensive advantage. The M2 Browning had demonstrated that in the arithmetic of modern war, sustained fire multiplied by unlimited ammunition equals victory. Regardless of fortification, thickness, or defender determination, today, the thunder of .50 caliber fire still echoes across American military ranges worldwide. The weapon that Japanese soldiers called the Akuma no Buki, the Devil's Weapon, remains in service 8 decades later. A testament to John Moses Browning's genius and to American industrial power that transformed battlefield mathematics forever. The legacy isn't just mechanical. It's the lesson that in industrial warfare, the side that can deliver more firepower more consistently with better supply chains will prevail. The Devil's Roar spoke truth that Japanese defenders on Peleliu learned at terrible cost. Courage and preparation matter, but industrial superiority decides modern wars. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical destruction. What began as a defensive masterpiece became a psychological collapse measured in minutes rather than hours. The sound alone became a weapon that destroyed morale before destroying positions. Industrial capacity translated into tactical dominance that no amount of individual courage could overcome. The mathematics were brutal and absolute, proving that modern warfare belongs to those who can sustain the highest rates of fire with unlimited ammunition supplies.